Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we got another stadium card to talk about. And ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely confusing stadium. But I think I've just about got a handle on it. I think. Myself and the lovely David Hochmann have had quite a long conversation about this today, talking about the literal translation from Japanese to English and all sorts. It's very complicated, but I think we've got it down now. I think we figured out what it actually does. It's called Dust Island, and what it does is that if a player switches one of their Pokemon to the bench with an effect of a trainer card, the new active Pokemon is now poisoned and takes as many damage counters between turns as the previous active would have. There we go. It took a long time to get there, ladies and gentlemen. It's an extremely confusing card. Now, some of you were like, hang on a second, why didn't you mention this in the Alola Muck video? Because I was trying to figure out exactly what it did. A couple people have shared translations with me that they got from other places, and I think they're all slightly incorrect. Now, the best way to illustrate this is using either Guzma or Escape Rope. Essentially, if you are doing the switching, your Pokemon stays poisoned. But if you switch your opponent's Pokemon, they do not stay poisoned. So let's say, for argument's sake, both active Pokemon are poisoned. Let's say we're having a poison barb party. Both players are playing it. Everybody's poisoned. If I play a Guzma, I drag a bench Pokemon active while switching my active. I have played a trainer card to switch my active Pokemon. My new active is poisoned. I don't get rid of poison. My opponent's active Pokemon has switched, and it has switched because of a trainer card, but they themselves did not play the card. I did, which means that their Pokemon will not stay poisoned, and they will actually get out of the poison. David mentioned how it has the word you, their own, and he even gave us a Japanese symbols for it, and that basically tells us that only the player playing the card to switch keeps poison. If the other player makes your poison Pokemon switch, you get around poison. It's a rather confusing card, but both Guzma and Escape Rope work the same way. If both active Pokemon are poisoned, if I play Guzma or Escape Rope, my new active is poisoned, but my opponent's is not because they didn't play the card. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, a very awkward, confusing card, and that's why this video's come a bit late in the day, and it's why this wasn't included in the Alola Muck video, because I had not seen a correct translation. I've seen a few that were all slightly different, and now I think we've got it nailed down. Huge shout out to the lovely David Hochmann. So now we know how this card works, and I'm fairly sure we're right at this stage. Is it any good? And essentially, you poison your opponent's Pokemon, and then you say to them, ha ha ha, you can't get out of poison by switching. There's a million cards like Switch, like Escape Rope, like Guzma, etc., that your opponent is going to use to get around poison or any special condition. And this basically says, ha ha ha, gutted, you can't do that. If you try doing that, you are still going to be poisoned. It's just the new Pokemon is going to be poisoned. That's pretty harsh. This is kind of similar to Sea of Nothingness. Now, Sea of Nothingness stops your opponent getting around special conditions by evolving or devolving. This is only about poison, but it stops your opponent switching out of it. Now, it only stops them when they're using a trainer card. That means that if they retreat, this does nothing. It is only if they go to the bench with an effect of a trainer card. But how many times have you poisoned someone and they've used a switch, used an Escape Rope, used a Guzma, etc. to try and get around it? This means that they will keep the poison. And clearly at this stage, we need to go back to Alola Muck. Now, I'm not going to go through Alolan Muck properly. I did that video earlier today. I'll pop a link in the description. But Alolan Muck's first attack, well, it's Muck and Alolan Muck Tag Team GX. The first attack for a Psychic, double colourless, poisons them but puts 8 damage counters on between turns. Now, that's a lot. And this actually means that Sea of Nothingness becomes kind of irrelevant. Now, I didn't mention Sea of Nothingness earlier because I don't think you really need to. If we take Gardevoir as an example, Ralts, okay, you can play Sea of Nothingness to stop them evolving into Kirlia, but Ralts has 60 HP, Sea of Nothingness will do nothing, Ralts will get KO'd. Similarly, Kirlia, you can play Sea of Nothingness to stop Kirlia evolving out of it, but similarly, Kirlia's got 80 HP. Kirlia's getting KO'd anyway. The vast majority of evolving Pokemon have 80 HP or less. Not all, but the vast majority. So it's kind of a moot point. However, there's plenty of Pokemon out there, like Pikachu and Zekrom, that have a huge HP and will try and switch out of this. Now look, they can still retreat, and the wording essentially says, if they switch to the bench with an effect of a trainer card, which means Ace Roller would get around this. Because Ace Roller, you're not switching to the bench, you're picking up. But again, if you're really worried about Ace Roller, use Mr. Mime, the new one we saw in Team Up, which stops your opponent using Ace Roller. Seeing the combo here? You can use something like Alolan Muck and Muck Tag Team GX, and then your opponent is poisoned, but they can't Ace Roller, and they can't Guzma around it, they can't switch around it, and if their Pokemon is a high enough retreat that they can't just manually retreat, then either they've got to have the active Pokemon poisoned, or they've got to switch into a new Pokemon, which will then be poisoned. And this is where the second half of the wording on the card becomes so important. You take the same amount of damage counters as the previously poisoned Pokemon. And this is definitely on the card, it was very specific. So something like Alolan Muck, who with the first attack puts 8 damage counters on between turns, or the GX attack can put 15 damage counters on between turns, which is getting a bit silly at this stage. The new Pokemon would take 8 damage counters, or would take 15 damage counters, and still be poisoned. This is a really useful card. And look, if you're not playing a poison deck, this isn't going to be great. I suppose at this stage I should shout out, I think it was Carl Peters, correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong, did well at a fairly large European tournament recently, playing Poison Dot deck with stuff like Tapu Koko and Poison Barb and Survivor and all of that. And if you're playing a deck like that, this is brilliant and I love it. You've still got to have the conversation of, do I like it more than Shrine of Punishment? And the answer is, that's up to you. Certainly this is better against non-EXGX decks. Arguably not against EXGX decks. Again, that's a decision for you to make, depending on the specific deck that you're playing. But the fact that you've got Mr. Mime to turn off Ace Roller, and then you can bring in this to stop your opponent switching out of it, really does make me extremely excited for this card. It's only for poison decks, but in poison decks, it's really, really good. The combination of this and Mr. Mime basically says, can you manually retreat? Because if you can't manually retreat, this poison is staying on there. And look, it's a stadium card, alright? So we got to mention Field Blower, because Field Blower can get rid of it. And your opponent can play any stadium of their choice, and if they do, they do. This is a risk. Your opponent can get rid of stadiums quite easily. And if they get rid of it, they get rid of it. But they're not always going to be able to get rid of it. And when they can't get rid of it, this is brilliant. It's a very niche card to be sure, but in any poison deck, this is going to be a lot of fun. It's an awkward card to translate, and I'm fairly sure we've got to the right one. As with all of these, until we get an official English card, we're never going to know exactly. Because sometimes the translation does change slightly when you come over. But I think David has figured it out, and I can't really give myself any credit whatsoever. This is David. This is David figuring it out and telling me. He is a lovely man after all. But this is a good card. And if you're playing a poison deck, you have got to consider it. I know Sea of Nothingness hasn't really seen any play even in poison decks, But how often do people evolve out of poison? The answer is not that often. We've got a lot of basic decks, and then all the other decks evolve quite quickly. In the mid to late game, it's kind of pointless. How many decks switch out of poison using something like Guzma? Oh yeah, that happens a lot. I'm giving this between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies, that would be barbaric. Because actually, it's still not going to work in a whole bunch of decks. But in the decks it does work in, it's going to be pretty gosh darn good. But ladies and gentlemen, I would very much like to know what you think about this card. So please do let me know in the comment section. Go nuts! But please do remember the rule. Be nice, would you? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWassie, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, patreon.com/PTCGRadio is where you'd go to do that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassiePlays, where we talk about games that don't have Pokemon in, but we still have a lot of fun. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.